than I can at my young age. So some older people, as you all know, are very fit and spry. They're not all frail. My third reminder would be this, that the old are not passengers. Yeah? We sometimes in the UK regard older people more of a drain on our resources rather than a resource that we can use and tap. And this is an excellent review down here by somebody called Jenna Evans, and here's the nice quote in it here that I'll actually let you read through rather than me reading out, in which she makes this point about the old not being passengers. So we must bear that in our mind too when we're having conversations about older people. And my fourth and final reminder would be that the old of the future are going to be rather different individuals than older people are now. The old of the future is the youngest person in this room in 50 years. Yeah? And they'll have grown up with an entirely different perspective about what they're entitled to, what society should give them, what responsibility they have for their own health. And we've got, when we're thinking about the future of care for older people, we've just got to keep that in mind, that the old of the future may not be such a placid and undemanding group as the current old in many countries are. So that's my four reminders. Now I'm going to give you two chunks of background knowledge. And the first is demography, or the structure of the population in India, and why a little knowledge of that is helpful. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the kind of basic figures here. This is the population in millions of the United States, India and China between 1950 and 2050. And you can see that by 2000, both China and India are dwarfing the United States in terms of total population. And by about 2030, 2040, it's predicted that the population of India will be the largest in the world. It will overtake China. Now, clearly, an increase in population size of that amount in that time brings problems, potentially brings problems of its own. Yeah? You've got to remember that. It could do that, just the change in population size. But what's, I would argue to you, more important is this, what we would call the shape of the population. Okay? And I'm going to show you three graphs now that show you how the shape of India's population has changed. You won't be able to read the numbers, but up this axis here is the age of people in the population. This is very young people down here and very old people up here. And blue is males, red is females, and what this graph shows is that in 1950 there were an awful lot of people in the population who were very young. And you come right up to the top of this pyramid here and it's tiny. So there are a very small proportion of people in the population who were old. India's total population in 1950 was 300 million, and only 4% of people were up at the top of this pyramid over 65 years of age. How does that shape change with time? Mortality or death rates start to fall, starting with infant mortality rate. And there's the infant mortality rate in India really plummeting between 1950 and 2010. Okay? So fewer children die, fewer young adults die, etc. The mortality rate comes plummeting down. Then the next thing that determines change is a fall in the birth rate. Okay? People start to almost realize that they don't need to have as many children. More of their children survive. So these two combined factors mean that the shape of your population starts to change. So in 2010, 1,100 million people now in India, 7% over 65. So that's roughly where we are now. But look what's happened to the shape. The breadth at the bottom has gone. Yeah? The proportion and number of people in the population who are very young has narrowed right down. There's fewer. And you can see that the beginning, at the top of the pyramid is beginning to fatten out, hence 7% over the age of 65. So that's where we are now. This is what's ahead for India. Okay? In 2050, It won't be a pyramid anymore. It'll look more like, to my eye, the roof of the Taj Mahal. Yeah? So a journey from the pyramid to the Taj Mahal. In 2050, the total population in India will be 1,500 million. So the population's increased only by about a third. I know it's 400 million people, but it's only by about a third. Whereas the proportion who are over 65 has more than doubled. Yeah? The base here is narrower, many fewer children. There's this middle-age spread of people in their middle age, and there's a much broader apex at the top there, many more older people. Now, why is it that that shape is important? Yeah, I'm suggesting to you it's not just numbers that are important here, it's the shape of your population. And there's three reasons that that Taj Mahal shape is of importance. The first is that, as you all know, and as common sense tells us, the older you are, the more likely you are to become unwell. Aging concentrates illness. So if you've got an older population, there will be more illness. That's it. The next two reasons I'm going to deal with in the next two slides. And there's an economic implication of this change in shape, and there's a social implication of the change in shape. And I'll come back to that first one, the medical, if you want, the health implication, in more detail in my next section. So what's the economic implication then of this shape of population? Well, it's easiest explained in one slide with this. This is called the dependency ratio. Okay? And the things you need to know about the dependency ratio is, first and foremost, it's a number which expresses the proportion of your population that are dependent on others financially. So that's the very young and the very old, people who don't or can't work. It's regarded by economists as a key determinant of economic output. And the lower the number is, the better in economic terms for a country. Now this graph looks a bit complicated at first. Again, it's from 1900 through to 2100, so 200 years. And the most important line is this top line. Okay? This is India's dependency ratio. And you can see in the 50s and 60s it was very high because there were so many children in the population. But look at it plummeting here. Yeah, as the mortality rate and fertility rate falls. And in about now, and over the next 2 or 3 years, the dependency ratio in India is as low as it's going to be. Because as the population starts to age, this is this here, the dependency ratio rises again. It doesn't get as high as it used to be, but it rises again. Now, I say all that simply because one of the reasons that India is in a position of such economic strength just now is that fact. Yeah? Many more people, particularly females, are able to be in the workforce because of the decline of need of childcare. But in the future, that's going to shift. There's going to be an aging population and perhaps a need for more family care back to older members of the family. Anything with an economic impact can have an impact on healthcare. So that's why I think it was important that I mentioned to you the dependency ratio. The other implication of the change in the shape to that Taj Mahal in 2050 is the social implications of change that come. So, as I'm stressing, it's not just that there's more older people and fewer younger people in your population, it's that there's fewer children in each family. Yeah, so instead of 4 children, you've got 2. Instead of 2 daughters, you've got 1. There are increased female employment opportunities. So your daughter now might be working rather than able to look after you as an older person. Your daughter's job might be in another city, or if you live in the country, the city. So the family fragments. And the fragmentation of families that was mentioned in the introduction is established in the UK. And I suspect is coming, or well on the way to coming here, and must be borne in mind when we're thinking about an aging population. The final thing before I leave demography that I want to really stress to you is this. India will be like this in 2050. That is where the UK is now. Yeah? We've made this transition from pyramid to the Taj Mahal. And we've not actually done very well. Yeah? These are all headlines, recent headlines in our media. NHS hospital wards on brink of collapse as number of beds fall by a third and doctors struggle to cope with 37% rise in patients. Elderly patients are being shunted between beds like parcels. Intolerable bed-blocking crisis threatens the NHS. The NHS faces an intolerable bed-blocking crisis that funding cuts lead to half of its ward being filled by elderly people who should be in care homes. Hospital bed crisis could leave neediest patients untreated. Cutbacks in local government care will increase pressures on hospitals. So how can that have happened over that transition? Well, one of the main points I want to make tonight, and as I said at the beginning, is I don't think that these problems are inevitable. All too often people look at the problems that we have and they say, oh, it's just because we've got an ageing population. That's not, I don't believe, actually the case. The problem is this: in the United Kingdom, whilst making this demographic change, we've allowed our plan for caring for older people to fall behind the demography. So the demography has beaten us. There's so many older people, our plan just hasn't kept up. So the real challenge for India is just that. You're going to make this change to a much, much older population. Can you develop a plan to put you ahead of that change? If you're going to do it, I would argue, and I'll show in a moment, it needs to start now. But it's possible to do it. Okay, the next chunk of the background, the second chunk of the background, was really why ageing is important in that Taj Mahal shape. What's different about disease in older age? Well, as I've said, disease concentrates in older people. And I've given you here just a range of some of the common chronic problems that there are in older people. Chronic obstructive airways disease, chronic kidney disease, diabetes. I won't read them all out. You'll note that I have noted here still infectious disease, because as well as being in what's called the demographic transition, India's in what's called the epidemiological transition. You've got what's called a double burden of disease. You've got these chronic degenerative diseases now coming, but the elderly population still has infectious disease to bear. And these two points I want to make about these kinds of conditions. One is that, this is a term we've been using a lot today, is that many patients, in fact the majority, once you get over the age of about 70, have more than one of these problems. Yeah? So it's not just a case of having a single health problem, you have multiple problems. And when you're constructing systems to care for old people, if you don't remember that, you'll get nowhere. So that's the first point I would make. The second point about these kinds of diseases that happen in older people is that many of them, for example, let's say heart failure, they're stable most of the time, but then suddenly you'll become very, very unwell with it, maybe life-threateningly unwell. And so they're characterized by periods of what we call severe acute decompensation that require a lot of medical input. And you need to go into hospital, usually. And again, when you're planning service for older people, you need to remember that people with chronic diseases suddenly become unwell. I know it seems obvious, but sometimes it's forgotten. So that's disease in old age. The next concept I wanted to give you was about dependence. There are many, many diseases that can affect you as you get older. And they cause symptoms, yeah? Things that people mention to doctors that allow doctors to try and work out what's wrong. And I've given you some common ones there. And the end point of disease and the symptoms that they cause are what we call dependence. Yeah? So people need help to walk, to wash, to toilet, to feed. And there's a current figure about dependency in over 80-year-olds in India that are